Welcome to another episode of our Personal Empowerment Premium Audio Series, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder. And our program today is really about one of the most empowering things you can learn to do. Today's show is about saying no. You know, saying no to unreasonable requests, saying no when you're overcommitted, and saying no to those negative thoughts that you have that try to convince you that you're not good enough or not worthy or not happily blessed in so many ways. Learning how to say no to others, learning how to say no to yourself, whether it's the process of over-pleasing people or just not taking responsibility for agreeing or disagreeing with your own thoughts. There's a great deal of power in saying no.
And a lot of resistance to it also, because there's something frightening about it. In other words, it seems to be easier. All other things being equal, we'll explore the different options and circumstances and such, but you know that phrase, go along to get along? It's used to describe a particular personality type, but also the tendency that all of us have to want to be perceived as okay people, nice guys and amenable women. And, you know, you don't want to disappoint anybody. You don't want to upset anybody. And so a lot of us have this go along to get along. If we're not sure if we come down in the middle, we're likely to nod yes or concede the argument. And on the other hand, as Steve is suggesting, to stand up and assert yourself and say, no, I can't do that, I won't do that, I don't believe I'm really interested in that, that's not going to work for me, is scary. And we're going to explore why. Because if you face your fear, like anything else, here's another situation where when you face your fear, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, you're going to learn about other people, and you're going to enjoy a remarkable amount of freedom and power too.
Yeah, there is a great deal of power in learning to say no. You know, you risk a lot when you don't say no. You know, when you say yes to things that you end up not doing, you know, you risk your integrity. You risk your marriage, you risk your friendships. When you don't have the power to say no, and you, even if you don't say yes because you didn't say no, you sort of implied yes, you know, you get in a lot of trouble that way. Misunderstandings happen. It's difficult because we don't want to disappoint people. You know, this has always been one of my passions, this power of disappointment. You know, it's such an overrated concept. People put so much intensity into fear of being disappointed, but fear of disappointing others is almost as powerful. Like, you run into a salesperson, you know, and they're giving you this sales pitch, and you clearly don't want to do this, you know. But instead of saying no, you say, well, I'll think about it, or I have to talk to I'll get back to you on that one, you know. We don't want to say no. You know, this is prevalent here, but when you travel around the world and you go, for example, to China, they never say no. They just it would be losing face. They just refuse to even get to what you do is you don't get the yes. You know, it really comes down to you don't get the yes. So learning how to say no to other people when you are overcommitted, even if what they're asking you is reasonable. For example, very rarely these days, but in the past, I used to be like really busy and having lots of things to do. And if somebody came up to me and said, Steve, we need to do this, and I'd look at it and I'd say, well, you know, actually all the other things that I have to do are more important than that one. So no, I can't do that. But I got to the point where I'd say, well, here's the other things I have to do. What do you think? Is this one more important than all these others? And then they walk away thinking, oh, well, he didn't say no, he really just showed me that it really wasn't the most important thing to do. Saying no is hard, and so I've tried to find a way to include other people in my no. But still, when you're overcommitted and you say yes, and it either causes your performance to degrade because you're too stressed by it, or it causes you to not complete the things that you said you're going to do, that's a huge price to pay for the inability to say one little syllable, no.
Salespeople understand this. Good salespeople understand this. And there is, of course, in sales, this whole aspect of overcoming the objection. And often it's not really an objection. Your refusal to say no, your failure to assert yourself and say, I'm not really interested in that, encourages a salesperson to continue. They're trying to get the yes. They're trying to counter your objection. Well, you can sidestep all of that, don't you see? If you just look the person in the eye, or if you're on the telephone, speak with a kind of resolve that says rather clearly, no. Or even, no, I don't think that's going to work, or no, I'm not really interested in that, and then say why. Salespeople usually back right off. In other words, you might want to consider to what extent you're encouraging an aggressive salesperson to keep coming at you again and again and again because they're waiting for a definitive decision. They want a yes or a no. They'd rather have the yes. You can say yes if it's something you're really interested in and want, but you can also say no. I think at some point what we have to do is take a look at how much of this is rooted in childhood and a fear of displeasing mommy and daddy. I mean, many young parents are mortified the first time a little boy or a little girl, 2 years old maybe, says no. Parents are stunned. And there can be consequences for that. What do you mean, no, young lady or young... Well, you can't tell me no. I'm your father. I'm your mother. And so you learn early on. That's imprinted, burned in, right? That it's a bad thing to say no because it displeases the authority figures in your life. So this go along to get along thing, it may seem like the path of least resistance to you, but again, you're not only encouraging salespeople, you can end up buying things you don't really want. You can end up, my God, you can end up in a marriage that you don't really want because you didn't want to upset the other person, disappoint them, make them feel sad. So you go along to get along in a marriage? That's not going to work. That's not too smart. But I've had a number of people tell me they knew walking down the aisle that this was wrong. But they're not going to change their mind at the altar. They probably should, but that only happens in the movies.
Well, actually, some have. That's happened where the bride or groom didn't show up.
Get me out of here.
That's a pretty rude way of saying no, if you ask me. But I guess better than getting married to somebody that you don't want to be married to. I don't know. There's got to be a better alternative than that. We really do learn this not to say no thing really early on, not only from mommy and daddy, but from siblings. I remember an experience early in my life when I had a little brother, and he wanted to tag along, and I said no, and then he was pissed, and he was like jumping on me and hitting me, and he was really angry that I said no to him. When I said yes, he was really happy and smiled. So you get it really early on that saying yes to people make them happy, and saying no to people make them unhappy, and so it gets really hard from early in our childhood to say no. The fear of disappointing people. Well, again, it's far better to say no and hold on to your integrity, or to say no and get what you want, when saying yes is just to give in. This is a weakness that we have, a fear of disappointing people. We feel a weakness come over us and we just sort of capitulate, but can't do that. We have to learn to say no, and the most important place we learn to say no, the place we practice it the most, is to ourselves. Because you see, every thought that we think is not a mandate, it's not a command, it's just a suggestion, using Rod Serling's great words, submitted for your approval. So when you say no to a negative thought, you take away its power. The power of the negative thought is to get you to agree with it. Well, when you say no to a negative thought, you make it inert, you render it powerless, you make it have no ability to do anything bad to you. So one of the greatest practices of saying no is to negative thoughts and negative feelings. When you experience having a worry thought about something bad happening, well, do you agree that you want that to happen? Is that the target you want to be aiming for? If you say yes, then your mind thinks that's the target you want to aim for. If you say no and replace it with a positive thought of the target you do want to be aiming for, the thing that you'd rather have instead, then your mind is getting the idea. So whatever you're thinking, your mind thinks that's where you want to go. But when you think something and then say no to it, your mind gets you don't want to go there. And if you replace it with something else, it does know where you do want to go. You can't just say no and leave it alone, because then mind goes, well, what do I have instead? But if you say no and then say, here's the yes, that's where the real power exists.
The vast majority of us in the United States and Europe, all around the world, have a tendency to confuse our thoughts and feelings with our identity. In other words, if I think this, it's got to be true, it's got to reflect me. The fact that we have these contradictory thoughts, this tendency to go, wait a minute, on second thought, these internal arguments, this ambivalence and apathy, it doesn't really bring to mind the fact that there may be a level of awareness that goes beyond thoughts. And the same thing is true for feelings. In other words, who makes a distinction between I feel sad and I am sad, or I'm feeling really angry right now, and therefore I am an angry person? It is possible to look at your anger or your tendency to feel angry from a place where you're not angry, to see your anger coming a mile away. Now, think about this for a minute, because you probably have an instance that you could draw upon, where you had a level of awareness where you could watch yourself becoming angry, and maybe even intercede and say, hold on, it's really not in my interest right now to allow myself to become irritated or angry in this situation. So you're not those thoughts, you're not those feelings. Ultimately, you could be the awareness that takes a step back and detaches, mindfully aware that you could choose, as Steve just said, to approve or disapprove of the thought, to approve or disapprove of the feeling. So I say that as a way of setting up the fact that we often feel guilty when we say no, and then assume that that means I am guilty. There's this overwhelming bias. If I feel guilty, I must be guilty of something, right? What do I do with that? I worked with a fellow many years ago in radio who wrote a book. Dr. Manuel Smith wrote a book called I think the title was When I Say No, I Feel Guilty, or Why Do I Feel Guilty When I Say No? And he zoomed in on this aspect of what we're talking about today. The difficulty people have asserting themselves because they want to please other people. Another way of saying that is, well, I feel guilty, and therefore we make this leap that I must be guilty of something because I'm feeling guilty. Well, all you're guilty of is disappointing other people, and maybe they set themselves up for that by asking you something that would cause you to be out of your integrity to do. Maybe they want you to help them cheat or help them participate in some scheme that requires you to lie, even just a little bit. And you get out of your integrity. You compromise your values because there's this conflict, right? Do I help my friend and be a good person who helps others, even though this is out of my integrity? I have to lie or cheat or steal or something, even just a little bit. Or do I honor the fact that this is out of my integrity and have to deal with the fact that you're disappointing your friends? People are conflicted by this, and often they put more value on the other person's feeling than they do on their own, you see. Again, this feeling that if I feel guilty, I must be guilty. It's not true. You can feel guilty and not be guilty of anything.
Except feeling guilty.
And, well, I suppose you can judge your judgment, but you can take that step back. How do you do that? Well, you know the answer to that. You go to paradise. If you've been listening to this series, you meditate, you contemplate, you get quiet and go into a reflective level of mind, whereby stilling the body and feeling safe in your physical body, quieting the mind and calming the emotional nature, just like water that is no longer choppy but now is as smooth as glass. You can see into the water now. You understand. When you breathe and relax and feel safe and your mind gets quiet and your emotions get calm, you can look at that guilt. You can hold it in the palm of your hand at arm's length and Acknowledge, yeah, it's too bad I can't please this person, but in my integrity, to tell you the truth, no, I can't go along with that. I can't agree to do that. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say no.
Not easy, but in the short run, but certainly a whole lot easier in the long run. Something I think we have to practice. It just doesn't come naturally because we didn't learn it in childhood. We learned just the opposite. We learned to say yes to the authority figures of our lives, and we've spent much of our lives saying yes to virtually everything that people that we hold in authority tell us to do, whether it's our doctors or our lawyers or our parents or, our bosses. Oftentimes it's a really good idea to say yes. Most of the time it's a really good idea to say yes. But something, I think it was Timothy Leary first brought to my attention, it's really important to question authority. It's really important to not just say yes because of who's saying it to you. I may agree with 99% of what a president of the United States has to say, but if there's one thing that I disagree with, I get to say no to that thing. I don't have to say yes to everything. I don't have to say yes just because the person who's saying it, is the authority. And again, that applies even more so to ourselves. As Michael was talking about, just because we have guilty thoughts and just because we feel guilty, we don't have to agree and say, yes, I must be guilty just because I have those thoughts. I'm not the thoughts. And that's where the no comes in, it's almost whatever I think, automatically my mind's saying yes to, unless I stop and say no to it, unless I purposely say to my mind, that's not one of the targets I want to be aiming at. Even though you're putting up there for me, that's not one of the targets I want to be aiming at. So you have to purposely get to that point. I had a habit, I don't know where it came from, but I had a habit frequently in my late teens into my 30s of being kind of paranoid when I was driving a car, and I always had these thoughts of the car breaking down, and whenever I had that thought, I would just say, no, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about that thought. And I didn't really say no to the thought. I said no to I don't want to think about the thought. And that's a big difference, because what happened was I started to ignore how much oil was in the, I started to ignore whether or not it was full of water. I started to ignore the car because I didn't want to think about it. And so it started to manifest. The thought, I'm afraid my car is going to break down, actually did contribute in some way to my car breaking down, because I didn't say no to the thought. If I'd have said no to the thought, I'd have gone into the thought of my car is going to break down. I'm going to think, what is it about this thought that's coming up for me? Where do I need to pay attention to, and what do I need to do so that I can release that thought? Not how can I push it aside, because when I push it aside, I hold on to it. It's when I go into it and experience it that I can release it. So saying no to a negative thought doesn't mean pushing it away. Saying no to a negative thought, say I want to understand this thought so I can, through my breath and through my feeling safe inside, release it. Saying no doesn't mean ignoring. Saying no means I understand this thought and I want to grok it completely so I can release its power over me.
Here's something else to consider. You could, if you find it really, really difficult to say no to somebody, to express your assertiveness in this way, let that person in on your process. Tell them, first of all, well, I'd like to say yes to that because it feels like, or, I'm thinking now that da-da-da-da-da. Share that process. And then say something like, on the other hand, the reason that I'm thinking maybe this is not a good idea, or maybe we shouldn't do this or go there, is da-da-da-da-da-da. And then share that process and follow it with a question. It sort of puts it back on them. Plus, they don't feel combative. I mean, everybody is selling something. I talked earlier about sales, but I don't mean only salesmen and saleswomen are selling things to you. Everybody is selling something, their friendship, the nature of the relationship, this idea, that idea. Again, we want to be agreeable. The bias or the tendency is we want to be liked by other people. We want love, and if we can't get that, we'll just settle for a little bit of attention. As long as there's a modicum of acceptance in there, we'll take that. So the resistance to saying no, or not wanting to disappoint people, the guilt we've talked about, is sort of overstating it. Often it's much more subtle than we've described so far. And so what I'm saying is when you let somebody in on the process, invite them to participate, to come on into your head, if you will, and then use questions. I'm often surprised by how resistant people are to even asking questions of each other. I think a question is a very powerful device, and if you invite somebody in on your process, say, well, I'm thinking about this, but then it feels like that. Well, what can you tell me about that? Or what do you think about that? And then you get in a dialogue, and it's almost then like a conspiracy. The word conspire literally means to breathe together. You let somebody in on it, they feel like part of it, and then if you do get to a no, even if it does disappoint the other person, they don't feel so bad, and you don't feel bad about making them feel bad because you conspired to do it together.
Yeah, there is a lot of power in doing that, and it's not a rejection. It's okay process.
Like a consensus instead.
Yeah, it's like it wasn't just my idea. I'm imposing this upon you. I'm eliciting from you your suggestions, your ideas, and creating this, this answer together.
It's like asking for an agreement to your saying no. You get them to say yes to you saying no.
Right. Like, let's look at what would happen if I said yes and I didn't do it, and that it wouldn't be a good idea to say yes, would it? And we come to that consensus. That's a really nice, not always available to us, but when it is, and it often is, it's a really, really great way to go. Practicing saying no in the little times, to the people that you are afraid of disappointing, sometimes it's really important to do that. And you can do it gently. Give me some tenderness beneath your honesty, Paul Simon said. That's a great way to look at it, too. So let's look at the other side of this equation, though. Sometimes the way you say no is powerful, and sometimes the way you say yes is powerful. It's not just the yes and the no. You could say no in such a way that it's sort of like, well, no, I don't think so, versus no, definitely no. There's a big difference. And there's a difference in your own thoughts, the way you say yes to your thoughts by going, okay, or going, yeah, that's a great thought. I love that thought. What we must understand is each of those words, yes and no, is not like a static, powerful statement. It's yes can be anything from a 0 to 100, and no can be anything from a 0 to 100. No can have almost no power, and no can have a huge amount of power. How you say the yes and how you say the no, whether it's in your own head, whether it's to yourself or to the other person, the way you couch it, the way you put it out is a really important part of the process too. So part of the equation, one side of the coin, is the saying of the yes or the saying of the no. But as important, I believe, is the other side of the equation, which is the way that you say the yes or the no. If you're talking about communicating with yourself, listening to your own thoughts and feelings, when you have a positive thought, a thought about being more assertive, or a thought about being more successful, or a thought about getting out and doing that thing you've been putting off that you really need to do, if you go, yeah, that's a good idea to that thought, well, that's what it is, a good idea, but you don't really go do it. What causes you to do it? What causes you to actually get off your butt and go do it? Well, that's saying yes big time. That's saying, yeah, that's a great idea. Wow, look what would happen if I did do that. And start to create the magnet with the emotion of what would happen, what would be the positive result of doing that. The big yes is one of the most important things the mind can learn to do. The big yes to the positive thoughts, as well as the big no to those things like, you're releasing excess pounds, and there's that piece of, chocolate cream pie. Sometimes there's that one, if I can get past this one, I know in my mind, this is the first temptation I've had. If I can get past this one, sometimes one particular no is a really big no. That first no to that cigarette when you've stopped smoking, that first no when you've been saying yes to something over and over and over again. Sometimes there's a big no that can't just be no, it's got to be no with a lot of intensity, with a lot of passion, with a lot of power. So the way you say no, the way you say yes is very powerful. And I'm suggesting one of the most powerful things you can do is say yes very powerfully to those wonderful positive thoughts and feelings that you experience.
Yeah, so there's saying no to other people or groups and externals. And as Steve has said a couple of times here, you want to take a look at the power of saying no to yourself. Now, it's very likely that your view of self is so unified that you don't really acknowledge the ambivalence we often have and the internal arguments, the back and forth, like the temptation Steve talked about to have some sort of desserty kind of food that you know is not good for you, or some greasy, albeit delicious, but nevertheless full of oils and fats kind of food. And part of you obviously wants it, and then there's this other part. Sometimes it's referred to as the internal parent, as if the back and forth inside is between the childlike part of you that wants it and wants it now and is not actually reasoning through all the consequences. It's just, I want this, and I'm going to have an internal temper tantrum. I could be 30, 40, 60 years old. It doesn't matter. I want what I want. And then this other self that we could call the internal parent, or sometimes called the critical parent, which seems to me to be a little redundant. But anyway, that's the part that says, now hold on, slow down. Ideally, it uses a balanced voice. You know, what was that Paul Simon line, Steve? A little tenderness with your...
Beneath my honesty.
Beneath your honesty. I like that. And so the way you approach this childlike part of yourself, when you discipline yourself, all right, should be compassionate. You're dealing with yourself. But the idea that we have parts or bits or pieces of us, aspects or segments, is a very important concept for you to begin to deal with, to acknowledge the ambivalence or the tug of war, the disagreements and the arguments that you have with yourself, and then deciding, like Eckhart Tolle in Power of Now, he says, well, I don't like myself when I'm depressed. And then the second thought was, well, wait a minute, if I don't like myself, how many of me are there? And then the next revelation he had was, well, if there's two or more, maybe only one of them is real. So of all these voices you've got going on inside your head, these pulls, these tendencies to go this way or that, for all of these sub-personalities or parts of the self, which one's real, you see? And there's no easy answer to that. There is a part of you that is authentic. There is a part of you that's genuine. But it's very hard to discern, to even find, or even be aware of, unless or until you relax. This is the whole idea of mindful detachment, of equanimity, it's sometimes called, to be aware of the I that is superior to all of these other subparts, these selves and these little personalities, and that's the part that needs to assert some loving, compassionate control over the subpersonalities. Now, I think a nice way to look at this is to think of a beautiful gemstone, which for hundreds of years people have learned to cut and polish gems, so they have many different faces. They're called facets, right? If you have ever purchased a diamond, you're aware of the different cuts and the different facets. Well, facet means face. And so in this case, if you consider that the reason a gemstone is cut in this way is to reveal the maximum beauty of the stone by allowing the light to move into and through and sparkle in beautiful ways, maybe that's true for you as well. Maybe the reason you have different faces, some that are at very strange angles and some even in direct opposition, is not that you're two-faced in a negative way and can't be trusted or relied upon, or that this face and that face have equal status when it comes to making decisions. You're not the stone. You're not any of these faces. You're all of these faces and more. You can take that mindful step back, zoom out, detach, and say, well, that's part of who I am in order to reveal all of my potential and be the best that I can be. I need these different parts. And sometimes they're going to conflict. And sometimes they're going to fight each other internally. But to understand my identity is not merely to decide which one of these subpersonalities or facets gets to be the boss in this case. It's breathe, relax, feel safe, step back, see the bigger picture, the gestalt, so to speak, the whole enchilada, that whole diamond, and say, I am all of these facets. And it's in my best interest to say yes to this part and, to say no to that part. And if that part is going to be childlike and cause some sort of internal temper tantrum and make me feel guilty, I mean, listen to the language here. Some part of you is going to make some other part of you feel guilty because of the way you treated that part. I mean, it's pretty skitsy if you don't have a good understanding of the fact that the healthiest and most well-adjusted people are simply those who acknowledge all of these parts and acknowledge the fact that often they're not in agreement. Maybe that's their value, is all this different input. You know, a diversity of opinion, even if it's within yourself, can be in your interest. You just, instead of choosing between this part or that part, be the one that steps back and comes from a place of a larger overview.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And to do that, really all you need to do is feel safe. Because when you're feeling endangered, then that facet of you that is ego, that is watching out for bad stuff to happen, it takes over, and it's got this loud, screaming, yelling voice at you, and you can't even ignore it. So we have to get out of that stress state, because when we get in that stress state, we have this super powerful need to please people and need to be right and need to be the best or what, look good and not look bad. And we get into this place where it's hard to say no because we're needing to please the other people and we're afraid of disappointing them. But also, and this is the way my mind works, I play with words, but also the other kind of no. When we get into that ego place, we say, I know. We always say, I know. And when we get into that higher consciousness, the words that come out of our mind frequently is, I don't know. And I don't know is one of the most wonderful things the human mind can say, because that leads to every kind of exploration. That leads to understanding. That leads to growth and change and magnificent things. So when we get out of stress, when we're in stress, we say, yeah, I know. But when we get out of stress, we realize, as the wise do, how much we don't know.
You've just defined wisdom. There are many wise women and men over time that have said knowledge is accumulating what you know, but wisdom is stripping away what you know you don't yet know, simplifying, voluntary simplicity, that kind of thing. And saying, well, I'm not sure about that. Well, I'm going to suspend my decision on this for a little while to get more information. Well, I'd like to think that through. I'll get back to you later. Yeah, that's really wisdom. That's why we call the person that seems to know it all a know-it-all, as if it's a bad thing. It really is. Like that old story in philosophy about I think it comes from Japan or China, about the guru that pours tea into the cup for his visitor from the West and just keeps pouring and pouring, and the cup fills and spills over the top, and the guru keeps pouring and pouring, and tea's running all over the table now and dripping off the sides, and keeps pouring and pouring and pouring, and the guy says, "What are you doing?" to the guru. He said, "What are you doing?" And the guru finally sets down the teapot and says, "Like this teacup, you are so full of yourself, there's no room for you to know anything more." So, yeah, that's really important, to honor and acknowledge what you don't yet know. Socrates said it a different way. He said, what if you realize that you are an ocean, and the more you know about the depth and the breadth of the ocean, the bigger the ocean becomes? In other words, the more you know you don't know. Have you ever heard it said that way? Or the more you know, the better questions you ask. I'm back to that. I really like asking questions.
Yeah, so know, whether it's the N-O kind or the K-N-O-W kind, is a very, very powerful word. And, something to know thyself really is almost the core of what this program is about, the finding yourself in paradise. The self is that higher self, and paradise is the place that you go where the ego can feel safe enough to shut up and the higher self can come through. And that's something that we always do in every one of our shows, so let's do it now. If this is a good time for you, get comfortable in the chair you're sitting in, or find a comfortable place to lay down, although laying in bed is sometimes, the tendency to fall asleep is pretty overwhelming, so it's probably better to sit up somewhere. But get real comfortable and kind of, move your body around into a position that feels really, really good. And then, the two things really that you can do almost instantly, both of which tell your brain that you're safe, two powerful signals. One is to close your eyes. When you close your eyes, your brain says, well, I must be safe, because if there's any danger coming at me, I'd be watching out for it. And then, of course, the other, maybe most powerful thing you can do is take a really slow, deep breath. Let your brain know that, there's lots of oxygen available to me, and there's another one coming right behind it. The closing your eyes, taking a deep breath, which lets your brain know you're safe, takes you down to a place where your brainwave activity slows a bit, your breathing adjusts down to a more quiet and rhythmic pattern, and your mind begins to slow down. And as you add to that deep breath and the eyes closed process of visualization and imagination, a sensory perception of finding yourself in paradise, in this peaceful place, this beautiful, calm, serene, and tranquil place, finding yourself in paradise is how you begin.
As you create and acknowledge the feeling of just how it feels to you right now to be safe and relaxed, consider that you do indeed have parts, subpersonalities, or if you want to call them faces. Consider that having more than one face is not a bad thing. We do play roles. We do have these personas that we act one way on a date, you act another way. If you go to church, temple, or mosque, you act another way. If you're with the boss, in a different way. When you're with your coworkers, let's say, or hanging out with your buddies. And it's like, well, which one of them is real? They're all real. But where's the link? What's the part of you that, like a golden thread, runs through all of these subpersonalities? You see, rather than accept that you're faking it and that to be two-faced is to be phony or false, embrace that. And say, yeah, I'm not only two-faced, I'm about 10 or 12-faced or 15 or more. You don't have to tell anybody else or let them in on this particular process. It's a matter of allowing yourself to realize you're that complex and, yeah, that beautiful and that wonderful. And that you have all of these different facets, not so much to manipulate people as to express yourself appropriately. And the secret is to be in touch with the unified self, the higher self you find in paradise. The part of you that says, I'm not this facet or that face. I'm the part that can mindfully detach and see them all from a place of harmony. Not even unity so much, but more like harmony. And there is an ebb and a flow in my life, in the way I feel and in what I think. And now you realize your ability to make better decisions. You understand that your bias is you'd like to please other people. You want their attention. You want their approval. You want their acceptance. You long for that connection from other people. You want them to acknowledge that you exist and that you have something to offer them. And we often play to that, but you don't really need to. When you mindfully detach and see all of these parts, you can assert yourself and say yes when you mean yes. You can say no when you mean no. And you can even include most of the people in your life, maybe not always, but most of the time, you can, at least to some extent, from this level of expanded awareness, include them in your process of, well, I'm not sure. Part of me wants to say yes, but there are these other facets that aren't really all that sure. What do you think about this or that?
You have the power to say yes to the positive and no to what is not. And you recognize that this is one of the most powerful powers you've got. Say yes to those requests that serve you and serve others as well. But when someone asks something unreasonable, you find it easier to tell them no. It's a simple thing to say, no. And you find that in your way, saying no creates the boundaries that you need, saying no. And saying it with some speed sometimes when it's necessary to do so. Say that no. And you'll find that other people will mind. They'll get it. It comes through. It's very clear what you mean to do when you say no. And say it to yourself when your thoughts or your feelings are not what you desire. Say no and release them, and then you can conspire with all those facets of your mind to seek and find a better way, a better thing to say, to which you can say yes. You don't have to guess. You can listen and know. There's a part of you. Just go to that higher part inside. Put away your pride and just realize that you'll know where it's right for you to go and where you need to say no. So learn that. Practice it. Positive thoughts say yes. Negative thoughts say no. Practice in your own mind, and it'll be easier to go to other people and say it too. You'll find no comes much more easily out of you.
In this place of peace and relaxation, consider that you are in fact unique. We've got fingerprint evidence and DNA proof that your authenticity is rooted in your genuine uniqueness. So although we are like other people in many important ways, we're also different. And sometimes that difference needs to be expressed with an assertiveness that sounds like no. No is not always a negative thing to say. No can be a very positive thing to say. Just as taking action to accomplish something is not in and of itself always the right thing to do, sometimes a refusal to take a particular action is a much more appropriate thing to do. So, consider that the ambivalence and the internal struggle is not really between yes or no, or even right or wrong in the smaller sense. But what's most appropriate, not only for yourself, but for the greater good of all concerned. Too often, we frame our decisions as what's best for another person and I'd like to help, or what's in my interest. And you can replace that or with an and, what's best for everyone concerned. And sometimes that's a no, a very positive no.
So no is often the right answer when yes will cause you pain. No, sometimes you have to follow that and sometimes you have to explain, but sometimes it's important to be very clear, coming from confidence and not out of fear, but being very clear that your schedule is full. There's just no room to say yes, and that it would serve everyone, them and you, it would serve everyone the best if you say no. You must know in your mind that that's true. That's something that you have the option to do. Be very clear, and just don't function out of fear just because you're afraid that you'll disappoint. Say yes when there's time, when there's space, when there's room, but when there's not, you must be clear and not operate solely from fear. Practice in your mind saying no. And when it comes time and you have to go there, you can. It'll be easier to do because it's something that's been practiced inside of you. So imagine circumstances where in the past you'd say yes and it just didn't turn out at all for the best. And this time you can say no. And what you can see is that it makes everyone more satisfied. It's a better way to be. Imagine that. Make it clear. So you operate out of confidence instead of out of fear. And the next time a circumstance arises just like that, you know what you need to do. And you can say no much easier because it's something you've already been through. You can say no with much less pain. You can say no and not even need to explain. You can say no. And it can be very clear that this is right. And you're not coming from fear. Say no when you need, and find the wondrous places that will lead.
Reorient yourself to the place around you by bringing to mind what you'll see in just a few moments when we ask you to open your eyes again. Feel the furniture supporting you or the pillow upon which you sit beneath you. Follow your breath for a moment or two. Be aware of your intention to come back to the wide-awake state as you inhale slowly and fill your lungs. Hold as you peak for just a moment. And now, as you exhale, relaxing even more. Open your eyes, wide awake, alert, refreshed and rested, back in the room, feeling fine, even better than before.
Yes or no, depending upon what the answer is. This, I'm thinking these might be two of the first words that were ever invented. Probably before there were words, there were nods and shakes and all that stuff, ways human beings have said this to each other. But what a basic, primitive concept this is, agreeing or disagreeing. And again, it doesn't have to be the word. It's just the basic concept. And with your own thoughts and with whatever happens inside your mind, you don't have to agree with everything that your thoughts come up with. Your thoughts come up with some horrible things, some terrible things, some worries that are just so insane to pay attention to for an extended period of time. Anytime those thoughts come up, remember, pushing them away is how you hold on to them. Going into them, experiencing them, is how you release them. It seems contradictory, but going toward is the way you let go. Going away is the way you hold on. So negative thoughts, what no means is, no, I'm not going to let that become my target. I'm going to go into that thought take away its power with a breath and release its hold over me. No is the way to get rid of those negative thoughts and negative feelings.
I got a little rhyme for you. Going away is holding at bay.
Nice.
But holding at bay is still holding on. You know, that's the trick in that. Hey, thanks for being with us. Join us next week as we continue with our personal empowerment series, Finding Yourself in Paradise, at focusedpassion.com. Send your friends. You could tell them about it, or you could say, you know, you just got to listen to it. And then use the send one to a friend gadget. It won't cost you a nickel. At the account page on the website, just log in with your username, that's your email, and the password you chose at focusedpassion.com. And you'll see right there in the built-in player, send one to your friend, kind of a tool will send the email with the link for you. Thanks for being with us today. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui, Hawaii.